Okay, there we go. All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Stephen Maples. I am the public participation specialist and transportation planner here at the Capital Region Transportation Council. And I will be starting us off real quick. So let me go ahead and share the screen. Well, just one moment. And hopefully everybody can see. There we go. All right, so welcome to our draft 24-25 Unified Planning Work Program and Public Participation Plan virtual workshop. We're going to talk about both of these very important documents today. So just to get us started, got a couple of quick announcements. So we're going to have the ability to do Q&A. We're going to have the ability to ask questions. We just point you to those buttons down at the on your toolbar. And we do have ASL interpretation today. You can find that icon, and hopefully that will have Heather, our interpreter, so you can see her. If you run into problems, just throw those concerns into the Q&A, and I'll address them as best as I can. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Sandy Misowitz, our executive director.
Excuse me, right at the right time. Excuse me. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sandy Misowitz. My apologies. I'm the executive director of the Capital Region Transportation Council. If you're not familiar with us, we are the metropolitan planning organization for the Capital Region, the four-county area that includes Albany, Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Schenectady. We're a federally funded transportation policymaking and planning organization, and our primary role is to allocate federal transportation funds to various transportation planning activities in the region, as well as capital projects. Our members include all of our 8 cities, our 4 counties, various local governments, meaning towns and villages, and our organizational and state and regional partners, including CDTA, DOT, the Capital District Regional Planning Commission, the Thruway, the airport, and the Port of Albany. Next slide. Our organization has 3 primary functions under federal law. One is to develop a metropolitan transportation plan. This is a long way of saying it's a regional transportation plan. It looks out 20 years, is updated every 5 years, and provides a policy framework in which we make transportation decisions in the capital region. Our current MTP is known as New Visions 2050, and we're just initiating a process to replace that plan with a new plan. The second primary function is the development of a transportation improvement program, or TIP. It's a 5-year capital program of projects updated every 3 years. Our current TIP is for the time period beginning October 1st of 2022 through September 30th of 2027. And we are also going to be embarking on an update of that in the very near future. And then the final major product that we're required to produce is a Unified Planning Work Program. And this is an annual report that documents all of our Transportation Council planning activities and budgets for the state fiscal year that begins April 1st and ends March 31st of the following year. We currently are operating under the 2023-24 UPWP, and we're here to talk today about our draft UPWP that begins April 1st, 2024. Next slide. So what is a UPWP? A UPWP, as I said, is a document that includes a list of all of our planning work that's being undertaken by staff, by consultants, or others in the capital region. It describes the products of that planning process, everything that's going to happen in this upcoming fiscal year. Who's performing that work is documented, the timeframes, the fund sources, and the costs. Again, it's a federally required document, and it also includes, in our case, we do list other planning activities that use other funding sources outside of federal funds. So you will see in this document when you review it that there's some local projects, some agreements we have with local governments to undertake planning work in the region, and those are all reported and documented in the UPWP. Next slide. So how do we develop this document? Going back to October of this year, we released a call for projects to our local governments, our state and regional partners, and others in the capital region to see what local, state, and regional planning priorities there might be. We held a virtual pre-application workshop related to that call for projects, and applications were due in on December 1st, 2023. We received 5 applications from funding. 2 of those were awarded funding at our prior planning committee meeting held back in January, and we'll discuss those today. Also in the month of December, we had received from DOT, our NISDOT partners, guidance on how to prepare the UPWP and our funding estimates. In January, we spent a considerable amount of time assembling the draft UPWP. And on February 7th, our planning committee approved and reviewed and released this draft UPWP for public review, opening that 25-day public review period. So that's where we are today. And here are the funding estimates that were provided to you, or to us, I should say. Our primary fund sources are from the Federal Highway Administration, FHWA, and the Federal Transit Administration, FTA. There's planning resources that we receive from both of those US DOT agencies to support our metropolitan planning program. In addition, there's a fund source that was created in the recently enacted infrastructure law called the PL Set Aside, where we take 2.5% of our planning funds from the Federal Highway Administration and reserve them specific to safety or complete streets type planning work. So that is a new fund source that we're using to support our UPWP and our planning work. The table on your screen just shows the budgets for each of the years, last year as well as this year, and it's just being shown this way for comparison. Essentially, our funding is flat. For the FHWA PL funds, we're working with approximately $1.8 million. For the set aside, about $150,000, and for the FTA funds, roughly $470,000. We also received a grant from the Federal Highway Administration through a program called the Safe Streets and Roads for All program, which I'll get into more detail later on. But that grant award was valued at over $1.1 million, and we're excited to be utilizing these resources this year for Vision Zero safety planning in the capital region. Next slide. So what's in the UPWP? I'm going to briefly go through the planning tasks. Each planning task has its own line item, has its own information associated with it in the document. So I can't go through it in all the details today, but I'll give you some highlights for what is in the UPWP by planning task. The committee activities line is basically our staff time to support our policy board work and our planning committee. The Transportation Council Administration task is relates to the operation of the MPO, working with our local government members, working with our staff. It includes a number of training and other opportunities for our staff and for the communities in the region. The Unified Planning Work Program task is specific to this document that I'm speaking about today, which is developing and providing performance reports on the outcome of the planning process that we document in the Unified Planning Work Program. The Equity and Non-Discrimination task is going to involve restarting an Equity Advisory Committee that had gone sort of dormant this last year or two as we were revamping our equity planning work, and we expect to bring that back this year. And a lot of emphasis and resources will go into our equity planning work as we build a new regional transportation plan. NISAMPO administration and the NISAMPO committees and working groups tasks. These are both related to our statewide association of metropolitan planning organizations, as well as our Transportation Research Board and our National Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations. We hold a staff contract to provide statewide services, and that's the $300,000 task. And we also use these funds to support our staff's participation in working groups and committees related to all of these national organizations, which are great networking opportunities to bring best practices back to the region. Our public participation task relates to the subject matter in the second half of today's presentation, the implementation of our public participation plan, and all the work effort that goes into our public participation. And we also manage a technical assistance program for local governments, in which we reserve funds for our staff as well as the Capital District Regional Planning Commission to do small scale, short duration planning projects in collaboration with local governments. And new for this year is a reserve of funds to hire vendors or consultants to do some drawings or other sorts of planning work that may be beyond the expertise of what we can do here in-house. Next slide. This next group of projects are sort of our data-related tasks. We collect a number of transportation data types, ranging from traffic volumes, whether that be turning movement counts or traffic volume AADT or average annual daily traffic counts. We also collect bicycle and pedestrian counts and a number of other counts. So that's all encapsulated in the transportation data collection task. We also draw down upon the census data that the U.S. Census provides and manage with Capital District Regional Planning Commission, the Capital Region Indicators website. And finally, we maintain a geographic information system platform within our organization in which we can map data, analyze data. A lot of this work is done in-house to produce maps. They produce the interactive maps you see on our website related to the trails plan or related to other topic areas, and that's all funded through the GIS line. Next slide. Our STEP model is a systematic transportation evaluation and planning model, and what that really means is it's forecasting traffic. And we put a lot of resources into maintaining this model because it's used to help in the evaluation of transportation projects. It's used to help in the planning process. So a lot of resources are put into this regional planning model. We're also investing in climate change planning with our partners at CDRPC to implement CDRPC's pollution reduction grant through the US EPA to develop a carbon reduction strategy and to hopefully do more with reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. That also relates to our regional operations and congestion management task, in which we maintain a congestion management process, which essentially is the method by which we assess congestion or traffic delays in the capital region and identify strategies to help reduce congestion. And that can range from, small scale intersection improvements, new traffic signal additions to activities that help shift travelers from cars to transit or walking and biking modes. And all of that is captured in that particular task. Infrastructure planning refers to our work in cataloging and tracking pavement condition data and bridge condition data, as well as some other types of infrastructure, but primarily those two, because we need that information to understand the condition of the system for the region and for use in planning. The Regional Signal Timing Program is a program that we piloted last year that's sort of wrapping up in this fiscal year, where we worked with local governments to improve their signal timing plans at signalized intersections in the region. And by doing that work, that can help ease congestion and help the flow of traffic. One of the largest tasks we'll be working on in this upcoming year is the development of a new metropolitan transportation plan. As I said earlier, this is a regional transportation plan that sets regional policy on transportation plans and projects. We'll be undertaking a large effort with a lot of public engagement over this next year. You're going to see a lot more public meetings, workshops, social media events, surveys, all kinds of tools we'll be using to gather information from you, and helping us to piece together a new plan for the next 20 years in the capital region. Performance-based planning is a task that's one of the more federally required tasks, but essentially we are required under federal law to um, meet and track performance measures, some related to the pavement condition, some related to crash data and safety. And we try to develop a long-range plan and a capital program that helps to make progress on meeting the targets for those performance measures. Those performance measures are set federally. The targets are set by New York State in partnership with the MPO. And we work with all of our planning work to try to make progress on improving the condition of our system and reduce fatalities and serious injuries. Next slide. Complete Streets task is one that we've been carrying forward for a few years now. We will be participating in developing some kind of a best practice module for use locally to kind of celebrate some of the accomplishments we've made in implementing Complete Streets in the region and talk about some of the stories from those who have participated in implementing Complete Streets. And we'll continue to do Complete Streets planning work over the coming year. In our freight planning, we maintain a freight advisory committee. We're just about wrapping up a freight or truck parking study. Should be done any day now. And we'll be working to implement that as well as partnering with the New York State DOT on the development of a statewide freight master plan. Another area of investment this year is Americans with Disability Act planning. And in the Americans with Disabilities Act, what we get involved with specifically is helping communities to develop ADA transition plans so that they can begin planning to reconstruct or reassess their infrastructure to ensure ADA compliance. We do data collection in partnership with local governments to assess the condition of the system and develop plans for the incremental improvement of the system. And so we will continue to invest in consultants to assist us in developing transition plans for local governments. Active transportation planning, we maintain an active transportation plan advisory committee that's also open to the public. And I should say that all of our advisory committees are open to the public. In the active transportation planning range of things that we discuss, not only is it bicycle and pedestrian planning, but we discuss e-bikes, e-scooters, all different sorts of micro-mobility options and how to plan for all of those as we build a better transportation system for the region. And another US DOE Department of Energy program called Clean Cities is a carbon reduction program intended to help implement zero emission vehicle infrastructure, transform vehicle fleets to zero emission vehicles. And we put a lot of resources into that with some grant funding from the Department of Energy. Next slide. Another large activity that we'll be undertaking this year, as I said earlier, is the development of a new transportation improvement program, which we expect to kick off in the fall of 2024. We will be soliciting more than likely for new capital projects to build out this 5-year plan of capital projects. And again, this is a topic that we'll be reaching out to the public for, again, for input and suggestions on the different projects being proposed. Related to that is our air quality conformity task. And in this task under the Clean Air Act, we need to ensure that the projects that we're selecting for our TIP and our long range plan are in conformity or help to maintain the air quality in the capital region under the Clean Air Act regulations. Travel demand modeling services, we use the STEP model that I mentioned earlier to provide traffic services to local governments. For example, forecasting the background growth rates of traffic when they're reviewing a development proposal, looking at the distribution of trips maybe from a development proposal, and all those services are covered under our modeling services task line. And finally, on this page, the TIP project development support line refers to work we do in partnership with our DOT and others on the implementation of planning and environmental linkage studies. Right now, we have active in the region the 787 Reimagining 787 study. Our staff time is recorded here for that. We'll be embarking on another project in Schenectady County related to the I-890 Exit 4 area by what is now known as SUNY Schenectady. And we will be helping the DOT move forward with the 378 Planning and Environmental Linkage Study that was just recently been completed. Next slide. This group of projects refers to a lot of our transit and safety planning, as well as security planning. The Human Services Transportation Coordination Task is specific to agencies that provide transportation for those with disabilities, those who have lower incomes, that provide these specialized services for folks. And we try to coordinate to the extent funding and opportunities allow. Part of that task involves the use of a Human Services Transportation Advisory Committee, as again, open to the public. And we'll continue to support that work this year. The transit planning task is one that we do in partnership with the Capital District Transportation Authority, our transit partners at CDTA. CDTA is doing a lot of planning work right now in terms of developing a transit development plan, developing a new bus rapid transit expansion study, doing a route restructuring program. So there's a lot of collaboration going on with our CDTA partners for transit planning in the capital region. Transportation demand management initiatives refers to activities that we implement to help reduce the use of single occupant motor vehicles in the region. This may include implementation of carpool programs, park and cash out programs, van pools, a number of approaches. And this year we'll be funding a survey to try to gain an understanding of what motivates people to not use their cars for their trips. And we're hoping to learn some things from the survey that we can use in our TDM planning work. Probably the biggest initiative we have from a dollars perspective is in the safety planning line. As I mentioned earlier, the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant is going to allow us to prepare a regional Vision Zero safety action plan. This plan will be done in partnership with the cities of Albany, Troy, Saratoga Springs, Waterville, the village of Green Island, as well as other municipalities in the region, because it will be region-wide. There'll be a lot of data analysis regarding crash data. And the whole point of the plan is to develop approaches and strategies to reduce our fatalities to zero. That is the purpose of a Vision Zero plan, and it's a long-term plan, but we're excited to be initiating this. And again, there'll be a lot of public engagement involved in the development of that plan. And finally, on the screen, our resilience and security planning work, we try to offer modeling services for emergency evacuation route planning. We are also partnering with, or supporting, I should say, the Department of Transportation in the development of a statewide resilience plan or vulnerability assessment of infrastructure. And we hope to use that information to tailor a scope of work for our own local resilience vulnerable infrastructure assessment plan in the next year, UPWP. Next slide. And finally, in terms of what's in the UPWP, and thank you for bearing with us, this slide has a number of local planning initiatives that we are undertaking. The town of Malta and the town of Colony, we work with them on traffic impact study support related to their generic environmental impact statements or GEISs. And we provide a lot of staff support to those two towns to help out with their reviews of the impact of development from a transportation perspective. We will be wrapping up this year, planning studies in the city of Schenectady, in the village of Colony, in the town of Brunswick, and the towns of East and North Greenbush. We'll also have planning studies that are in various stages of progression in the village of Voorheesville, in the Albany County, sort of Menands, Watervliet, City of Albany area, the village of Castleton on Hudson, in the town of Colony, and the town of Rotterdam and the town of Milton. So we have a lot of local community planning studies going on with two new additions for the upcoming year. The first one is in the towns of Half Moon and Clifton Park on County Route 109, in which we'll be working with them to prepare a corridor study that looks at complete streets treatments and implementing more mobility options in the County Route 109 area. And then the second study is in the town of Niskayuna, which is a complete street study on Route 7 from the town line to the town line. So these are the two new initiatives we'll be adding to the UPWP this year. And that pretty much summarizes what's in the UPWP. So next slide. So how can you provide input? First step is attending this session today, and we thank you for your attention and time. You can review the document on our website. You can take a brief survey. The link is provided on the slide, and we also have that available on our website as well. You can email comments directly to us at info@capitalmpo.org. You can also fax comments or call us at 518-458-2161. You can send comments via USPS mail to our office. And we have another open house scheduled on February 27th at our office at One Park Place between 4 and 6 p.m. You're welcome to come in person if you would like to offer some comments and feedback that way. Following the open house and the completion of the formal public input period, our policy board is planning on reviewing and adopting the UPWP at its March 7th meeting. Next slide. So at this point, we'll pause to see if you have any questions. Feel free to use the Q&A on your screen. You can also use the chat function if you'd like to chat. And you can also raise your hand and request to be unmuted. So if there's anyone who has any questions at this time, I'd be happy to answer them. I don't see any in the chat or the Q&A. Do you have anything, Stephen?
Does not look like that. We'll give it just another second, and it's looking like there's not. So we'll go ahead and we'll swap things around here.
Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everyone. So I'll be picking up for the next part of the presentation, focusing on our public participation plan. So let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, what is the public participation plan? It's a federally mandated document that talks about how we in the Transportation Council, how we are going to interact with the public. How do we interact with you all? And while we're at it, who is the public? How are we defining the public? And basically anyone who works, resides, visits, passes through, uses the transportation system, whether that's an individual, organization, agencies, these are all the public. And just a note about federal requirements, there's a lot of federal requirements that go into the framework of how this public participation plan was built. Things from civil rights in Title VI to the bipartisan infrastructure law itself, the ADA, there's a number of elements there that develop the framework. So the first thing we'll talk about is equity integration. And You can see here, this is our statement about how the Transportation Council understands equity at the intersection of transportation and public participation, as well as our approach to equity, that it should be integrated into our planning approach. And I won't read all of this to you, but you can see how we're trying to be mindful of how power operates, of how process works, as it relates to transportation and public participation. So what do we mean by being cognizant of it, of having equity integrated into our approach? Well, it's basically sort of this list of questions. How are we understanding, who are we talking to? Who is missing from the conversation? What participation methods are best suited to the communities that we're attempting to reach, and so on. So what are our goals for the public participation plan? What do we want out of our public participation? And it basically breaks down into these four goals. Continuous, that the public input is collected throughout the planning activity, from the early stages to hopefully going beyond even a discrete planning activity itself. Thorough, that we're trying to reach as broad an audience as possible. Inclusive, which is related, but it's about reaching those who are usually excluded. And finally, effective. How are we evaluating our efforts and learning from them? So we're going to talk about how do we put those goals into practice. So what we've come up with is that the transportation will develop what we're calling a public involvement plan, a PIP, that will lay out how the goals, those four goals that we just talked about, will be achieved for the public participation process for each of these documents that you see listed here, our core planning activities. And it should also be noted that the regional plans that we conduct, as well as those studies that are part of the Community and Transportation Linkage Program, will also produce a PIP as part of that larger document that will be part of the study. So what will it mean for those public involvement plans to consider those four goals? So we'll just quickly walk through what that kind of looks like. So for the goal of continuous, we've noted a few things that we're going to require of that public involvement plan to come that will address, as well as some things that we are asking to be considered. So you can see here, so for continuous, that we're saying, hey, at every key decision point, there should be some type of public involvement, and communicating how the public input has shaped the process and possible outcomes. And then the things that we are asking, that we think should be included in that public involvement plan, but with the understanding that specific circumstances or contexts of a given planning activity may not allow or may restrict in some way, are things about reaching out ahead of time to come up with the parameters of the scope of the planning activity, things of that nature, things that we really would like to see help meet that goal of continuous. But that we understand that certain planning activities, it may not fit that particular rubric. Getting to thorough, we talk about looking at the a range of interests and groups that may be impacted, and what are those, how the plan will best reach those people, and employing multiple modes of engagement, because we recognize that to reach as broad as possible an audience, employing different modes will allow a range of different people to engage with us during that planning activity. And as you can see, we've got a few more things to consider, thinking about things like low-tech modes that can make a lot of sense to reach out to people. Sometimes low-tech is the best, but we also are not going to be overly prescriptive on that. And obviously, we also want to encourage visualizations because visualizations help a lot of people understand the information that they're seeing. When we get to our third goal, inclusive, there are a number of requirements because this is, unsurprisingly, there are a lot of federal regulations around ensuring that certain groups of folks are included in the federal transportation planning process. Notably here, the limited English proficiency communities, conducting an equity scan, which would identify disadvantaged populations, those populations that have been historically left out of the transportation planning process. We want to see how people will specifically identify and target those populations for outreach and things like the ADA. And then, of course, there's always more that can be done. So we have come up with, this is a non-exhaustive list, but a number of other things that we hope that, whether it's a member of staff who's putting together a PIP for one of our core documents, or our consultant partners when we're doing local studies, will consider to expand our reach to those groups that are typically not part of the federal transportation planning process. And finally, effective. This is really about evaluation, and the Transportation Council staff will be looking at how did we achieve our goals here? How well did we meet these goals? And we're also going to be looking at how we can collect demographic information from participants, so that helps us with understanding how well did we actually meet those targeted populations, how well did we interact with them. And then we'll also be talking about a number of other things, a little bit more wide ranging, but again, trying to get at that, how well did we do at meeting our goals? So we also in this document cover the adoption and public review of our planning activities. This is just a very small sample of our activities. You saw our core documents before that list. This is just 3 of them. The full document has everything laid out there, but basically just lays out what the document is. You see like the frequency that we adopt them, when we last adopted them, and what the minimum public review is. And that's sort of a formal public review that happens after doing most of our outreach. So that's, I think, an important point to note. But we do have that commitment to doing a 25-day public review for most things. A couple other, some of the documents are slightly different, but all of those details in the public participation plan. So we'll come to outreach and meetings. How are we going to reach out to the public, and how can the public attend meetings that the Transportation Council holds? So we use a range of methods: press releases, websites, our newsletter. We always encourage anyone who's interested, sign up for that newsletter to stay up to date. That's usually a monthly newsletter. Occasionally we'll have special editions. Find us on social media, the various platforms that we have accounts on. And we will do some additional emailing that's targeted for very specific purposes. And then, of course, another way that the public can interact with the Transportation Council is coming to meetings. We have a uniform policy for public meetings. And what do we understand as public meetings? It's the policy board, it's the planning committee, and our advisory committees. And at each of those meetings, the public is invited to, we'll review the meeting agenda and materials that'll be posted 1 week before the meeting occurs. All the meetings, similar to this webinar, will be broadcast live, recorded, and available on our YouTube channel. The public is always invited to submit written comments, can register to speak at meetings, and we do offer reasonable accommodation. for anyone who requiring such accommodations, but just let us know at least 48 hours so that we can try to arrange that for anyone who may need it. And then very quickly, I'll touch on the evaluation side of our participation. So the transportation staff will evaluate, each of the public involvement plans, those for our core planning activities. The community planning studies will also have an evaluation that'll be conducted by Transportation Council staff after the study is completed. And then we'll also have an annual public participation evaluation, sort of looking at all of those efforts, and what we'll talk about in those evaluations is about whether the goals were met. There are four big main goals: whether they were met, if they were not, why not, and an overview of the quantitative metrics and goals that you see here, as well as some qualitative objectives that I'll get to in just a second. And then we'll just talk about like the lessons learned. If we've, to the extent that we've learned anything in the process, we want to promulgate that and understand that. So you'll see here on the screen a number of things that we'll be looking at. And we've set a goal for ourselves that we want to meet or exceed each of those metrics from year to year in that annual public participation evaluation. And one wrinkle to that is that the equity analysis metric, rather than simply just trying to, exceed the last year, kind of the more meaningful metric would be to exceed the demographic proportionality of the region, so that we know that we're reaching communities that have historically been excluded. And quantitative metrics are the bedrock of what we do. But we also acknowledge that there are some qualitative metrics that are a little bit harder to put, numbers behind. So you can see here that we're going to consider a few things that are a bit more qualitative, a bit more subjective, and cover that in our evaluation reports, whether that be part of the PIP for the core documents or our studies that staff will conduct after the fact. So we're going to try to incorporate all of that and see, and hopefully that enables us to continue to improve into the future. And with that, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Again, just if you have a question, throw it in the Q&A into the webinar chat, or raise your hand and we will get to you. Well, seeing none so far, please go ahead and throw them in for right now. We will thank you for attending today. Please do get into contact with us if you have any questions about the UPWP, about the PPP, or any other question that you may have pertaining to the federal transportation planning process. And since I don't see any other questions, we'll just thank you for your time, and we hope to see you very soon.